He was born into slavery, but by 1870, Charles Caldwell was a Mississippi state senator, a black man leading in a state that had once enslaved him. He fought for public schools, interracial marriage rights, voting access for newly freed black citizens. He helped draft a new state constitution, pushing for equity, education, and justice. And he did it under constant threat. But white supremacists saw his rise as a direct threat to the old order. In 1875, tensions boiled over at a Republican rally in Clinton. A violent clash erupted. Several black attendees were killed. Afterward, white mobs terrorized black communities. Dozens were murdered. Homes burned. Caldwell tried to hold the line. He led a black militia to protect his people, armed, organized, disciplined, still believing peace was possible. But on Christmas Day, he was lured into a trap. Someone he trusted invited him to share a drink. As they toasted, assassins shot him in the back. Before dying, Caldwell reportedly said, "Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward." His murder marked a turning point. Reconstruction's promise dimmed. White supremacists seized control, and Caldwell's name was buried, until now. I realized he didn't just die for politics, he died believing this country could be better. That broke me. Follow if this is the history we should have learned. Drop Caldwell in the comments if this is your first time hearing his story. And if you're ready for more untold stories of resistance, we're producing them now.
Did you know one of the most fearless black leaders in history was assassinated on Christmas Day for protecting black voters? Charles Caldwell, a former enslaved man who became a Mississippi senator, stood up for our rights and paid the ultimate price. But his story is more than history. It's a lesson in black men's mental health today. Caldwell refused to be silent. He fought for education, land rights, and justice for black Americans. But the weight of leadership and constant threats took a toll. Imagine the stress of fighting a system designed to break you. Even in 1875, Caldwell faced the same pressure black men face today, proving your worth, protecting your community, and carrying generational trauma. He stood tall, but at what cost? On Christmas Day, white supremacists lured him into a peace meeting, then ambushed and killed him. His last words? "I know you're going to kill me, but I want to die like a man." The mental toll of being a black leader in America? Still deadly today. We don't just carry history. We carry the weight of expectations, trauma, and survival. Charles Caldwell's story reminds us that mental health is just as important as the fight for justice. Protect your mind, speak your truth, and never let history erase our strength. Your mental health matters. Let's talk about it. Let's change the narrative. Black men deserve a space to unpack the weight of mental health, culture, and social dynamics, without judgment. KBST is more than just a conversation. It's a movement, a space to cultivate self-awareness, build resilience, and embrace collective healing. Healing isn't weakness. It's our greatest power. Join KBST. Let's talk. Let's heal. Let's reclaim our strength. How does history impact our mental health today? Tag a brother who needs to hear this.
Mississippi, 1875. The war is over, but the South still drips with hatred. The fields are quiet, but the saloons are loud, filled with bitter white men, former Confederates and Klansmen, clinging to the last scraps of their stolen power. They drink, spit, and swap stories about the good old days when black men knew their place, when a slave couldn't vote, when nobody like him would dare walk through the front door. A black senator, a former slave, a man who had terrified white supremacists just by standing tall. They had tried to erase him that night, ambushed in a basement by men who couldn't beat him in life. But even with a bullet in his skull, he refused to fall like a coward. "Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward," said Caldwell. This is the story of the blacksmith turned senator who bent the chains of slavery into weapons of justice, and the nightmare he became for every racist in Mississippi. Because when Charles Caldwell spoke, everybody listened. And when white America tried to silence him, they learned one brutal lesson. You can kill a man, but you can never kill a movement. But how exactly did Charles Caldwell come to power? And what exactly did he do that was so hated by those old Southern racists? Keep watching to find out. To understand Charles Caldwell, you have to understand where he came from. And we need to go back to Mississippi, the beating heart of America's racial nightmare. Nobody wanted to be a slave, but no slave wanted to be in Mississippi. The phrase, "sold down the river," struck terror in the hearts of slaves in Virginia and North Carolina because they knew what awaited them: brutal labor under the Mississippi sun, cotton and sugar plantations in conditions designed to break both body and spirit. The rice plantations were especially brutal. Slaves forced to stand in water for hours while malaria ran rampant, with child mortality rates reaching a staggering 90% on some plantations. Charles Caldwell was born into this living hell in 1831. And while most slaves were worked to death in the cotton fields, Caldwell found himself in a different kind of prison, a blacksmith shop in Clinton, just outside Jackson. Here's the thing about blacksmiths in the South, though. It was probably the best job a slave could get. Every plantation, every slave master, every overseer depended on them. Without blacksmiths, the whole machine of slavery would have collapsed. And Caldwell's craftsmanship set him apart. Even in chains, he commanded respect within his community. His work was so perfect, so precise, that...
Let's talk about Nat Turner's slave rebellion. Nat Turner was born into slavery on October 2nd, 1800 in Southampton County, Virginia. His enslaver was a white man named Benjamin Turner. Nat was passed down to Benjamin's son Samuel Turner when Benjamin died in 1810. Turner was deeply religious and very intelligent and learned to read and write at a young age. Through his teenage and young adult years, he got visions from God that eventually led to the slave rebellion. Purchased by a slave master named Joseph Travis in 1830, and then Nat got another vision, that to slay your enemies with their own weapons. In 1830 and 1831, he enlisted the help of over 70 enslaved and freed black people. August 21st, 1831, the rebellion began. They traveled from plantation to plantation with blunt instruments, axes, and hacksaws, killed any white person or enslaver in their path. They were eventually defeated and captured by the state militia. Nat evaded capture for 6 weeks, but was captured on October 30th, 1831 in Southampton County. Hung on November 11th. Nat Turner's rebellion truly stirred a fire, fanned the flames that eventually led to the Civil War and the abolition of slavery.
Nat Turner was eating him. That's like literally like the least of our worries. After they hung him, of course, because he overturned all those slave masters and stuff like that, they hung him, they cut him up, they sodomized him, first off. They churned his bones, his skin, they made it into leather. Like, it's a whole bunch of shit. And he never received a proper burial because there was literally nothing to bury. The little stuff that he did have, like ears and fingers, it's been rumored to have been passed down as family heirlooms in the white families and stuff like that. The book called The Delectable Negro. It shows you how to cut up a nigga like me and make me soul food. Like, soul food. Like, assault to injury. Emmett Till wasn't the only one found in that lake with those similar type bruises and all those things done to him. It was other people. They only show you like small parts. Like, they'll tell you stuff that's happening that white people did, but they won't tell you everything. That's why they want it out of the curriculum, because they don't want kids to feel like they're savages, but really you come from a long line of savage capitalists, cannibals. Like, it's a lot. Yeah, y'all, we don't even know all this happening to us because they only putting certain things in books. We only know a little bit about slavery. We don't know everything. People didn't even know they had breeding camps. They didn't know, like, just a whole lot of other little nasty shit that these people did. And so don't you dare, black person, ever think that you're the savage. Look at that white person and tell them, get a mirror.
In the early 19th century, a slave rebellion shook the foundations of the southern United States. The man at its helm, Nat Turner. Born into slavery in 1800 in Virginia, Nat Turner was no ordinary man. He was deeply religious and believed he was chosen for a great mission. Turner often had visions which he interpreted as messages from God, driving him to fight for freedom. In 1831, he led a courageous rebellion that lasted 2 days and shook the nation. Despite its brutal end, Turner's rebellion sparked a nationwide debate about slavery. His actions intensified the abolitionist movement, pushing the nation closer to civil war. Nat Turner, a man who despite the consequences, rose up against injustice.
Did you know one of the deadliest uprisings in colonial America began right here in South Carolina? On a Sunday morning in 1739, enslaved Africans led by a man named Jemmy marched with stolen weapons, their drums echoing through the swamps. This wasn't just a fight, it was a declaration of freedom. Before you scroll, ask yourself, why didn't we learn this in school? They moved towards Spanish Florida, where freedom was promised, burning plantations along the way. The rebellion terrified the colony so much that lawmakers created harsh new slave codes, stripping away what little rights enslaved people still had. But here's the hook. This rebellion forced the world to see that enslaved people weren't passive. They resisted loudly and at great cost. At least 40 Africans were killed in the battle, their heads displayed on spikes as a warning. Yet their courage sparked a legacy of defiance that lived on in every uprising that followed. Follow Carolina Rebellion for more untold truths they tried to erase. Comment yes if you think this story deserves to be remembered.
They said enslaved people accepted their fate. They lied. On September 9, 1739, before dawn cracked the Carolina sky, a group of enslaved Africans near the Stono River made a choice: freedom or death. Armed with stolen guns, they marched south, shouting liberty, a word learned from their origins and whispered by Spanish promises in Florida. This was the Stono Rebellion, the largest black uprising in the British colonies before the American Revolution, a hidden black rebellion buried by erased U.S. history. These rebels, many from the Kingdom of Congo, drew on the tactics of African kings and warriors. They were not unskilled, they were not broken. They were soldiers in a different kind of war. Their march grew as more joined, burning plantations, confronting slave catchers, refusing to be erased. They weren't just fleeing, they were fighting for each other, for dignity. The rebellion lasted hours, but its shockwaves forced new laws, new chains, and deeper fears among white colonists. Militias grew, surveillance increased, and punishments became even more violent. Yet the Stono rebels proved black resistance movements were never silent. Even in chains, we strategized, we organized, we rose. They told us we were born in chains. They never told us we broke them. That broke me. Follow if this is the history they never wanted us to learn. If the Stono Rebellion was left out of your textbooks, drop hidden resistance in the comments.
The Black Seminole Rebellion. It started in 1835 and lasted until 1842. 7 years for those of you doing the math. The Black Seminole Rebellion started with slaves in the South rebelling against their masters and rebelling against their keepers. And of course, they were killing their slave masters as they traveled south, picking up more people along the way. The U.S. government, being made aware of this, began to pursue those enslaved, now fighting for their own freedom, people. These enslaved people fighting for their freedom and rebellion had a plan to make their way down to Florida trying to escape. When they got to Florida, they linked up with the Seminole Indians in Florida. The Seminole Indians in Florida and these formerly enslaved people combined to fight against the American government for 7 years. For 7 years, the American military could not conquer these two groups of people. Once it became apparent that this was a stalemate, these former slaves and some of these Seminole Indians decided that the best thing they could do was make their way to Mexico where they would be freed. So they fought their way to Mexico, and even after Mexico, y'all know how America is, they couldn't take a loss. But they still couldn't defeat these formerly enslaved people. So the American government and these formerly enslaved people came to an agreement that they'd stay in Mexico and not come back and lead a rebellion, and that the American government will leave them alone. And the document that they signed in order to seal this became one of the foundation documents of another document that will come a few years later called the Emancipation Proclamation. This is our history. This is our story. This is our song.
Did you ever wonder why your school skipped the Haitian Revolution? It's not by accident. It was the first black-led freedom fight that actually won. In 1791, enslaved Africans in Haiti rose up, led by heroes like Toussaint Louverture. They defeated the French, the British, and the Spanish, all superpowers of that time. They built the first free black republic in the world. But instead of celebration, Haiti was punished, forced to pay reparations to France for losing slaves. That's why they don't teach it, because it shows what oppressed people can achieve when they rise together. History didn't forget Haiti. It was erased, but we're bringing it back. If you want more stories they tried to erase, follow this channel. Let's rewrite history together.
Scott unsuccessfully sued for his freedom. 10 years later, our highest court said no person of African ancestry, whether they were free or enslaved, could become a U.S. citizen.
This particular story is also suppressed because from day one, the governor actually spun the story as there's not much to see here. The French colonial society was terrified of this slave rebellion and the possibility that it could have been successful. They also wanted to downplay its significance because they didn't want people to think there was huge numbers of revolting and rebelling enslaved people.
Another reason this major event is lesser known may be because of this: Jim Crow.
Jim Crow was another trauma, another layer of trauma. I think that trauma, that newer trauma, just did hide the old trauma.
The segregationist laws across the Deep South made black people second-class citizens until the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. Unlike 1811, the 2019 version of the rebellion successfully makes it to New Orleans. Scott was deliberate in his choice not to visualize the uprising's brutal ending.
That white people did some terrible things during the times of slavery, that's not news. What is news is that black people had agency and self-determination and were fighting for freedom.
In reality, some enslaved people were able to escape. Others were captured and returned to bondage. And 45 people, including Charles DeLon, were sentenced to death. Their heads were placed on poles alongside the river levee from New Orleans to La Place to serve as a gruesome warning and reminder another slave uprising would not be tolerated.
They were able to formulate a plan and to carry it out, even though it did not end completely successful, but they had the desire to even try. So that exemplifies a lot of courage.
In Scott's historical adaptation, the rebellion ends in this jubilant celebration. There's dancing and joy and a direct connection to some of today's biggest issues.
We don't have those same obstacles today, and yet we need to fight in as determined a way as they did.
Here's a black history and capitalism fact I bet you didn't know. Did you know that the Louisiana Purchase only happened to stop a slave rebellion? The Louisiana slave market was the largest and most profitable slave market pre-Civil War in North America. Louisiana was one of France's wealthiest territories. Although profitable, it did not hold a candle to the sugarcane trade in Saint-Dominique, now known as modern-day Haiti. In 1791, on the island of Haiti, thousands of freed Africans as well as enslaved Africans revolted. This put in jeopardy France's sugarcane market in Haiti. Napoleon was not going to allow the colony to be taken over by formerly enslaved Africans. That's why America was able to purchase Louisiana from France at a steal, able to double the size of the country. France used the money from the purchase to try and quell the slave rebellion in Haiti, but it didn't work. After the purchase, slavery ended up expanding into Louisiana territory, specifically Missouri, where 100,000 slaves were there within the next 20 years. I'd also like to note that after this purchase, millions of indigenous Americans were forced onto reservations, forever displaced because France, well, they had to make a buck. Follow and like for more.
This is King Judah 23 of the Judahlyfe Podcast, and you watching the Empire Network.
Disobedience.